So get this, you're more likely to encounter a unicorn in a coffee shop than survive at the bottom of the ocean without air for more than half an hour. But some people are that lucky and unlucky at the same time. Take Chris Lemons, for example. Chris Lemons is a commercial saturation diver whose life changed in September 2012. It was a normal working day for him and his colleagues Duncan and David. They were sitting in a special chamber on the ship above the diving site. Then they entered a diving bell, crammed like sardines in a can. This is like another chamber dangling from the ship, which they use to get to the diving site. This chamber is like the claw machine you catch toys with, but instead of a claw, it has a small chamber at the end. They arrived at the diving site, and Chris and Dave prepared to dive. Duncan was staying in the bell to monitor the gear and, the most crucial part, the umbilical cord. This cord supplies divers with oxygen, heat, and power to keep their lights shining because at such a depth, it's super dark. So it's important for someone to monitor the situation since divers' lives depend on it. To better understand the process, you must know more about commercial saturation diving. Being in the office the whole day is much safer than being a commercial saturation diver, unless your office is in a lion's cage. Saturation diving is so rare and dangerous that you've probably just heard about it now. You must dive deep in the cold ocean to work on oil pipes and such. Diving in general can be risky because of something called decompression sickness. If you dive too deep and rise to the surface too quickly, tiny bubbles of nitrogen can form inside your body, which can cause serious health issues or worse. That is not a problem for regular divers because they don't dive nearly as deep as saturation divers. Saturation divers go from 600 feet to 1,000 feet underwater. That's almost the height of the Empire State Building. Rising to the surface from that crazy depth can take as long as 2 weeks. It takes less time to go to the moon and back. It's almost impossible to stay in the water for 2 weeks, so divers have a unique trick that keeps them alive. A chamber cleverly designed to have the same pressure as the bottom of the ocean. They spend months in this chamber. The chamber is isolated. It's like being in jail, but much worse. You can't get out no matter what. The world could be on fire, but you'd have to stay inside or pass away. The good news is that divers have the internet there. The chamber is filled with a mixture of helium and oxygen, so if you want to call your family, you will sound funny. Most divers don't call anybody.
Because it's fun to inhale helium and talk in a funny voice for a short time.
But doing it for weeks isn't very pleasant. Now you know more about this type of job and how dangerous it is. Thanks to all those clever tricks, divers can do their job without facing significant risks. But sometimes, bad things are inevitable. So let's return to our story. Chris and Dave had to replace a pipe section and do regular checkups at the bottom of the North Sea. For them, it was like teaching a cat to nap, whatever that is. But the weather above them was not so good. There was a strong wind and waves that reached 13 feet. On the other hand, weather like that was typical for the North Sea, so there was nothing unusual to worry about. The ship carrying out the mission had a crazy feature similar to autopilot. No matter how many waves there were, it would keep the vessel stable. The dive was going smoothly until the alarm started beeping out of nowhere. Dave and Chris immediately climbed in. David made it to the bell safely, but Chris's cord caught the edge of the manifold, and no matter what he did, he couldn't get out. He thought this should not have happened because there was plenty of slackline. He could hear the cord tightening, then realized that the ship had started moving. He had basically become an anchor, and as we all know, humans are not designed to be anchors. The cord snapped, and he fell to the bottom of the sea. This was the worst situation that could happen to him. He lost everything: oxygen, communication, and heat, meaning he would either freeze or suffocate. He had around 5 minutes of emergency O2, but that was not nearly enough to survive. Chris had to climb up to the manifold to be rescued. But when the cord snapped, his light went out, so he had to walk in the pitch-black sea and navigate by feeling around. Chris couldn't even see his hands, but he did the impossible and climbed to the manifold. The problems didn't end there, unfortunately. He was in the worst possible situation, and no one could tell him what to do or what had happened. Every breath was more valuable than a bucket of gold, so he had to breathe super slowly. Chris had only 2 minutes of oxygen left by the time he climbed up, and after some time, when he didn't see any signs of the rescue team, he lost all hope. The ship that was supposed to save him was in chaos. They couldn't stay stable to find him. All odds were against Chris at that moment. The only thing in his favor was that the ship had a small submarine that could be controlled remotely, and the crew could see what had happened to him. They got to the diving spot, and it was like watching a horror movie. You can't look away, and you can't unsee it. They all expected to see the diver in the worst possible shape. By some miracle, he was still moving, but not for long. Hundreds of people were glued to the screen, watching their colleagues suffer. They weren't that far from the site, but they couldn't do anything to save their friend. After the ship had stabilized, they went where Chris was. By that time, they had lost all hope and were going down to recover the body. David was tasked with getting Chris. He was feeling on edge, but prepared mentally for the challenge ahead. Around a half hour later, David finally arrived at the destination. He immediately grabbed Chris and climbed into the bell. Duncan was waiting for them inside. When they arrived, Duncan immediately took off Chris's diving mask. What they saw was horrifying. Chris's face was not the usual color, and he was cold. He looked like he had passed away. Duncan had tried giving him first aid, and suddenly, Chris jumped up, lively as can be, and sat down in his seat. David and Duncan were shocked. Chris seemed to be completely fine. He was examined by lots of doctors and was announced to be as healthy as someone who had spent a half an hour without air could be. By all odds, he shouldn't have survived more than 3 minutes without air. No scientist to this day knows how he survived. It could have been because he had been exposed to a high level of O2 in the chamber, and he also had a higher than normal O2 level in his lungs. The cold temperature could have slowed down his metabolism and prevented him from losing too much energy, but nobody knows for sure. Now, you would think that after this, he would never dive again, but he continues to work as a saturation diver to this day and has no intention of quitting. He even got back to the same spot that nearly destroyed him and finished the job that he had started. Wow. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.